Good evening, you are watching News in English. I'm Sona Tumanyan. There is likely no one who hasn't heard of this book, though finding the courage to actually read it takes time, perhaps even the right age. On this day in 1933, in what was considered a landmark ruling, a U.S. federal judge held that James Joyce's Ulysses was not obscene, thus paving the way for greater freedom in literature. Precisely on this day, a nation embarked on the path of independence and began creating its own history. In 1917, following the Bolshevik Revolution, Finland officially declared itself independent of Russia. And looking even further back into the past, the English royal line welcomed a new era. On this day in 1421, King Henry VI of England was born in Windsor. Is there a new conflict between Georgia and Azerbaijan? Complications arise in cargo transportation. Mirzoyan, Kalas and Kos meet, deepening cooperation with the EU in Brussels. Prisoners of war on the agenda of the Armenian delegation in Greece, Alain Simonian's meetings. Defense Minister Babagan attends edX in Egypt. The Putin-Witkov meeting lasted 5 hours, results that are not yet visible. The Caribbean continues to hear threats from Trump. The response is reciprocity. We begin tonight in Brussels with a major geopolitical shift in the Caucasus. Armenia and the European Union have signed a landmark strategic partnership agenda, a move that signals a deepening tie between Yerevan and Europe, and a significant step away from Moscow's influence. Following the 6th session of the Partnership Council, EU High Representative Kaja Kallas, standing alongside Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan, announced a €15 million aid package. Kallas was clear on the objective that money is earmarked to bolster peace and Armenia's resilience, specifically to counter Russian propaganda. And the financial commitment doesn't stop there. Earlier today, EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos unveiled a massive €500 million investment plan aimed at securing Armenia's energy independence and diversifying its economy.
The signing of the Armenia-EU Partnership Strategic Agenda became the key highlight of the 6th session of the Armenia-EU Partnership Council in Brussels. The document was signed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, Ararat Mirzoyan, and the High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. Prior to the Council session, the parties discussed issues related to the deepening of bilateral relations and regional developments during a private meeting.
To achieve results, we have launched the visa liberalization process, and we see its progress through the action plan. As a result of its implementation, we will have greater mobility and ultimately achieve visa-free travel.
Marta Kos, the European Commissioner for Enlargement, addressing the new agreement during a press briefing, clarified that it is comprehensive in nature. In addition to economic and political provisions, the document includes cooperation in the fields of security and defense. Key priorities include enhancing Armenia's economic resilience and diversifying its economy. Kos also noted that the EU is already working on an Armenia-Turkey electricity grid so that Armenia becomes increasingly less dependent on energy from Russia.
I recently returned to Tashkent, Uzbekistan. We were discussing how we can strengthen trade ties with Central Asia, and Armenia plays a central role in this regard within this inclusive regional connectivity agenda.
Armenia will also be provided with €15 million in financial assistance.
Today, I am announcing €15 million, which will be directed toward a peaceful and more resilient Armenia. Several initiatives will be implemented, training on demining and the provision of equipment.
Citing Moldova's experience and the risks of foreign interference, Kaja Kallas emphasized that the support would be available not only to state institutions, but also to civil society and the media, with the aim of developing institutional capacities.
Of course, Armenia has other challenges as well. Russia and its proxies are conducting disinformation campaigns in Armenia ahead of the parliamentary elections. We see the same networks that were used in Moldova. They worked very actively in Moldova, meaning the scenario is the same. The European Union's funding will help detect and respond to foreign influences.
The European side clarified that the ban on Armenian aircraft entering EU airspace is due solely to technical issues and will remain in force until the deficiencies are rectified. To accelerate the process, the EU is launching a twinning program, within the framework of which European specialists will directly assist Armenia in bringing the sector into compliance with international standards. Monika Hyroyan, ReOpen Media.
Let's also briefly touch upon the Mirzoyan-Kos meeting again. During talks between Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan and EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos, both sides emphasized their readiness to actively work toward deepening cooperation in all sectors. They discussed expanding the scope of current EU-supported programs using existing instruments, specifically to bolster Armenia's resilience. Mirzoyan and Kos also focused on preparations for major upcoming diplomatic events, the European Political Community Summit and the Armenia-EU Summit, both scheduled to take place in Yerevan this May. Armenia Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan also took the stage at the opening of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum Summit. Addressing the critical need for stability in the region, Mirzoyan stressed that despite years of challenges and skepticism, the government remains convinced that peaceful coexistence with neighbors is the only guarantee for Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He described the signing of the Washington Declaration and the initialing of the peace treaty as historic milestones on this path. Turning to relations with the European Union, the minister highlighted the unprecedented pace of development in recent years. Mirzoyan noted that while the comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement remains a solid legal foundation, the partnership has now expanded far beyond that original framework, enriching ties in new and diverse directions. Concluding the visit, the Sixth Partnership Council session issued a joint statement marking a pivotal moment in relations with the adoption of the new Armenia-EU Partnership Strategic Agenda. This ambitious roadmap sets the stage for the upcoming Armenia-EU Summit in May 2026 and underscores the EU's strong support for the historic peace progress achieved between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Washington. Notably, Brussels also positively acknowledged the Armenian Parliament's recent adoption of the law launching the EU accession process, validating Yerevan's deepening commitment to European integration. Beyond high-level politics, the Council highlighted tangible achievements in mobility and economic resilience. The parties welcomed the official handover of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan as a crucial step toward visa-free travel, while agreeing to align the EU's Global Gateway strategy with Armenia's Crossroads of Peace initiative. The statement also reaffirmed the success of the €270 million Resilience and Growth Plan, emphasizing continued cooperation in diversifying Armenia's economy, boosting energy security, and countering hybrid threats. As we reported last week regarding the upcoming diplomatic calendar, the next major engagement is National Assembly Speaker Alen Simonian's official visit to Greece. On December 1st, the delegation led by the Speaker of the National Assembly met with Greek President Konstantinos Tassoulas to discuss the deepening of bilateral ties and Armenia-EU relations. Both sides highlighted the importance of their partnership, touching upon democratic reforms within Armenia as well as broader regional developments, specifically the ongoing peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In a meeting with Greek Foreign Minister George Kirapetritis, the discussion broadened to include specific geopolitical initiatives such as the Trump Trip for International Peace and Prosperity and the Crossroads of Peace project. While addressing regional security and the peace process, Simonian drew particular attention to the humanitarian crisis regarding Armenian prisoners of war and missing persons currently held in Azerbaijan. Continuing the high-level agenda on December 2nd, Simonian met with the president of the Greek parliament, Nikitas Kaklamanis, where he proposed elevating relations between the two countries to the level of the strategic partnership. The counterparts discussed interparliamentary cooperation and the issue of detainees in Baku, ending the session with a joint statement to the press and an invitation for the Greek speaker to visit Armenia. Armenian Defense Minister Suren Babikyan paid a working visit to Cairo, where he joined Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi for the high-profile opening ceremony of the edX 2025 International Defense Exhibition on December 1st. Following the inauguration, the minister, accompanied by the chairman of the Military Industry Committee, Aram Jivanyan, conducted an extensive tour of the exhibition pavilions. The delegation examined the latest military hardware and technology on display, holding discussions with representatives from various international defense corporations regarding their capabilities. The visit also featured a robust diplomatic agenda aimed at strengthening security ties. Babikyan held high-level talks with his Egyptian counterpart, Minister of Defense, General Abdel Majid Sakr, with the participation of Ambassador Armen Sargsyan. The two defense chiefs reviewed the current security landscape in their respective regions and discussed concrete possibilities for expanding defense cooperation. Additionally, Babikyan met with the Minister of State for Military Production, Mohammed Salah al-Din Mustafa, to focus specifically on advancing military technical cooperation between Yerevan and Cairo. And back in Yerevan, the focus shifted from foreign diplomacy to the internal pillars of security. As Security Council Secretary Armen Grigoryan addressed the conference marking the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Grigoryan underscored that sustainable peace is important without the active participation of women, a principle Armenia has integrated into its national security strategy. Highlighting the country's leadership in the region, he noted that Armenia currently ranks 59th globally in the Global Gender Gap Report and boasts a 38% female representation in the National Assembly, the highest in the South Caucasus. He emphasized that the government is moving beyond symbolic gestures by actively increasing women's involvement in military, peacekeeping, and decision-making roles, asserting that women must be viewed not merely as beneficiaries of security, but as essential architects of a resilient and inclusive peace. And in another reality, the OSCE Minsk Group is officially dissolved. At 1 minute to midnight on November 13th, the institution and its related bodies ceased to exist. The dismantling of the 30-year-old format is based on a joint application by Armenia and Azerbaijan, approved by the Finnish OSCE chairmanship. The Minsk process is no more. The completion of all necessary administrative procedures marks the conclusion of the dissolution process, the statement read. This implements the consensus decision reached by all 57 OSCE participating states on September 1st, following the historic joint declaration signed in Washington on August 8, 2025, in the presence of the U.S. President Donald Trump. And new disclosures have emerged within Armenia's domestic political sphere. The government has published documents regarding the negotiation process for the settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict on its official website. The released files include proposals presented by the OSCE Minsk Group in 2016 and 2019, the so-called Kharkov and Kazan documents, the Madrid Principles, Russia's package proposals, UN Security Council resolutions, and a letter from Sargsyan to Vladimir Putin, among others. Specifically, according to the 2019 proposal, the final one prior to the war, the Armenian side was to return 5 districts. In exchange, Artsakh was to receive security guarantees and the deployment of peacekeepers along the border with the right to determine its future status through a referendum. In Turkey, the perception of friend and foe continues to fluctuate in line with government policy and state interests. A study by Europe Elects, reported by Yeni Ankara, reveals that Turkish society overwhelmingly views Azerbaijan as its closest ally, with 94.2% of respondents classifying it as a friendly country. Armenia, however, sits at the complete opposite end of the spectrum with a more 3.3%. While South Korea, Japan, Italy, and Russia are counted among friends, Israel, France, and the UK, also United States, follow Armenia on the list of perceived hostile nations. Yet, in stark contrast to these deep-seated divisions, official Baku is pushing a narrative of finality and resolution during a briefing at the Azerbaijani embassy in Brussels. Presidential aide Hikmet Hajiev declared that for Azerbaijan, the war is over and the conflict is exhausted. According to Hajiev, the focus must now shift entirely to consolidating peace and ensuring it becomes long-term. Adding another layer to this complex regional web, imprisoned former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili is accusing the current administration in Tbilisi of sabotaging relations with both the West and its immediate neighbors, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Saakashvili alleges that Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze demanded that Yerevan expel Georgian civil society figures who fled there to escape pressure. However, the Pashinyan government reportedly refused, asserting that Armenia has no foreign agent law and will not create one, thus having no grounds to restrict the freedom of Georgian citizens. According to the former president, Kobakhidze countered with threats to restrict the movement of goods, a tactic Saakashvili claims is already being used against Azerbaijan, pointing to weeks-long delays for cargo transiting from Turkey through Georgia. But the friction isn't limited to diplomacy. It is playing out on the highways, where Georgia's relationship with Azerbaijan is hitting a roadblock. Serious logistical issues have erupted for Azerbaijani cargo carriers. Drivers transporting goods between Turkey and Azerbaijan report being stranded for weeks at Georgian customs, ostensibly for cargo and document inspections. Pro-government media in Baku claim this is merely a pretext. They allege that Tbilisi is acting out of geopolitical jealousy, fearing that the potential opening of the so-called Zangezur corridor will strip Georgia of its monopoly as the region's primary transit hub. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze has pushed back against these accusations, denying any systematic blockade and insisting that reports are exaggerated, claiming only a single vehicle faced a delay. However, this scenario strikes a familiar chord. It serves as a reminder that just this past summer, Armenian cargo carriers faced nearly identical obstacles along the same route.
Weeks, even months of waiting and seemingly endless queues of trucks at the Georgian-Azerbaijani border. Hundreds of Azerbaijani drivers claim they have faced arbitrary actions by Georgian customs officers amidst artificially delayed procedures and a lack of explanations. For one of them, the situation has reached a critical point.
I am transporting cigarettes from Azerbaijan to Greece, and at the border, without any reason, even though there were no issues with the documents, they sent me here to customs, and I have been standing here for 21 days now. We have been here for 20 days. You approach them to understand what problem exists with our documents. The person supposed to let us through says, "Go sleep in the car, wait." They are keeping the drivers here like prisoners. They are torturing the drivers here.
The drivers claim that the situation is different when the same cargo is transported by a Georgian truck. In that case, problems do not arise at the border. Baku interprets this as an attempt by Georgia to control the transportation market. However, the conflict has another dimension as well. According to the drivers, Georgian officials speak ironically about the so-called Zangezur corridor.
The guys ask, "How should we go now? Which way should we pass? Where should we go?" They say, "We don't know. Go via Zangezur." They say, "You have your Zangezur road. Go, pass through there." We are asking for help, brother. For 75 days, they have deprived me of liberty. I sleep in the car, I sleep in the cabin. They have taken my passport. If there was a problem with my document, if there was a problem with my cargo, brother, they would have sent me back too. Why are they bringing me and dumping me here?
The Revenue Service of the Ministry of Finance of Georgia has categorically denied these accusations, qualifying them as absolute lies and disinformation.
Under conditions of increased cargo turnover, all customs procedures are carried out under a special regime to ensure unimpeded passage. In order to ensure the continuity of international cargo turnover, within the framework of joint management of customs checkpoints, the Revenue Service is in intensive communication with the relevant customs bodies of the republics of Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Armenia to quickly find ways to solve important challenges.
The Embassy of Azerbaijan in Georgia reported that they met with Georgian representatives who promised to solve the problem in a short time. However, the press in Baku sees a premeditated plan by Tbilisi in this situation, driven by emotional jealousy over losing the regional logistics monopoly due to the opening of the so-called Zangezur corridor. Former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili, currently in detention, also addressed this tension on his Facebook page.
Kobakhidze demands that Armenia expel Georgian NGOs from Yerevan, which is now full of of Georgians, since the conferences that used to be held in Georgia with Western money have now all moved to Yerevan and closed their accounts. Pashinyan's government replies that there is no law on foreign agents in Armenia, and there will not be one, nor are there grounds to restrict the freedom of Georgians. In turn, Kabakidze threatens Yerevan with restrictions on the movement of goods.
This situation is particularly familiar to Armenian cargo carriers, who for decades have also faced similar obstacles arising on the transit route through Georgia. Anna Harutyunyan, ReOpen Media.
Across the Atlantic, Armenian ambassador to the U.S., Narek Makirchan, is pressing ahead with a busy diplomatic agenda in Washington. On December 1st, Makirchan met with top officials from President Trump's Council of Economic Advisors. The talks centered on the new chapter in bilateral relations following the August 8 milestone, with both sides committing to deepen economic cooperation based on recently signed frameworks. The focus on businesses continued into Monday during meeting at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Discussions highlighted new opportunities in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and energy, while placing special emphasis on the TRIP initiative. Rounding out the series of meetings, the ambassador hosted Sergio Gora, the newly appointed U.S. ambassador to India and special envoy for South and Central Asia. The two diplomats discussed inter-regional connectivity and pledged to collaborate on mutual interests, again underscoring the strategic importance of the TRIP project. It's been called a diplomatic Groundhog Day, a vivid headline adopted by many outlines to describe the repetitive, frustrating cycle of Russia-American negotiations starting over from the same point. The latest round has just concluded at the Kremlin. Russian officials described the marathon 5-hour session as constructive, yet admitted that Washington and Moscow remain deadlocked on critical territorial issues. Meanwhile, President Trump is doubling down on his track record, reminding the world that he has stopped 8 wars and claims he now stands on the threshold of ending the 9th. But the roadmap to that ending remains controversial. We first learned of a 28-point U.S. peace proposal in November, a draft that set off alarm bells among Ukrainian and European officials who feared it conceded too much to Moscow's demands. That document has since been edited and whittled down to a new 19-point draft currently under discussion. Reaction is also pouring in from Brussels. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte called the Kremlin meeting extremely important, confirming the alliance is in lockstep with Washington. Speaking ahead of a gathering of NATO foreign ministers, Rutte was cautious, noting there will be other steps, though he refused to provide a running commentary on every phase of the talks. Crucially, Rutte signaled a dual-track approach. Parallel to the diplomatic push, the alliance intends to keep purchasing weapons for Ukraine. He expressed concern that Moscow shows no real readiness to compromise, stressing the need to ramp up pressure on Russia and maintain the sanctions regime.
President Volodymyr Putin, along with Donald Trump's chief envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner, met at the Kremlin and negotiated for 5 hours, but failed to reach a final result. The talks at the Kremlin began following a walk by the American envoys across Red Square, past the mausoleum of Soviet Union founder Vladimir Lenin, toward the Kremlin towers.
The conversation was very useful, constructive, and very substantive. It lasted not 5 minutes, but 5 hours. We did not discuss specific formulas or specific American proposals. We discussed the essence of those American documents. We were able to agree on certain things, and the president confirmed that to his interlocutors.
Yushakov reported that after the negotiations, Witkoff went to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow to report to the White House. He added that they discussed the territorial issue related to Donbass. Ukraine controls an area of 5,000 square kilometers in the Donetsky region, which the Russian side is determined to capture.
Well, I've settled 8 wars. This would be the 9th, and our people are over in Russia right now to see if we can get it settled. Not an easy situation, let me tell you. What a mess. It's a war that never would have happened if I were president.
There is progress in the negotiation process, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated days ago.
It's about also the terms that set up Ukraine for long-term prosperity. I thought we started laying the groundwork for that most certainly in Geneva. I think we continued that work in our communications throughout the week. I think we built on that again today, but there's more work to be done. This is delicate, it's complicated.
There were also reactions from NATO. Secretary General Mark Rutte noted that he is in constant contact with Rubio's team.
Yes. Yesterday, Putin was threatening Europe with war again, so...
I'm not going to react to every thing Putin is saying. We have seen him in military clothes, dressed like a soldier at the front, but not at the front. It was quite far from the front the day before yesterday, so no, I'm not going to react to everything.
Before meeting with Kushner and Witkoff, Vladimir Putin answered journalists' questions, stating that they have no intention of waging war against Europe.
We are not preparing to fight against Europe. I have already said that 100 times. But if Europe suddenly wants to fight with us and starts, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt here.
Putin added that in Ukraine they are fighting with the care of a surgeon, whereas in the case of Europe, the war would end very quickly, and there would be no party left there to negotiate. Europe is also concerned. Estonia is ready to deploy troops in Ukraine, and the German foreign minister declared that Berlin is in favor of using frozen Russian assets for the benefit of Ukraine. Belgium demands that the risks of using frozen Russian assets be shared equally among all allies. The European Council also announced today that it has reached an agreement with the European Parliament regarding the phasing out of Russian gas imports by 2027. Ani Hovanesyan, ReOpen Media.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is aggressively pushing his own diplomatic offensive on multiple fronts. Macron has arrived in China for a 3-day state visit with a clear primary objective: to secure Beijing's backing and exerting pressure on Russia. The Élysée Palace states that Macron will also champion an economic agenda aimed at stable, confident growth, seeking to attract Chinese investment while opening the Chinese market further to French goods. Several key agreements are expected to be signed, but Macron's outreach isn't limited to the East. At Paris' initiative, the French president also held a phone call with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The two leaders discussed the Russia-Ukraine conflict and developments in the South Caucasus. Erdogan emphasized Ankara's ongoing efforts to broker a fair and lasting peace, revealing that work is underway to restart Kyiv-Moscow negotiations in Istanbul. We turn now to the Caribbean, where the U.S. is aggressively ramping up pressure on Venezuela amid a visible surge in American military activity, including the deployment of warships to Puerto Rico and joint exercises in Panama. President Trump is taking a harder line than ever against Nicolas Maduro. In a cabinet meeting, President Trump announced that U.S. forces will soon begin launching strikes against ground targets in Latin America as part of the war on drugs, citing over 200,000 deaths caused by traffickers. Last year, Trump stated that only direct action is bringing those numbers down. The confrontation has also become personal. The White House confirms that President Trump held a phone call with Nicolas Maduro, accusing him of ties to narco cartels and delivering a stark ultimatum: step down from power immediately. However, the U.S. push is facing defiance despite Trump's declaration to close Venezuelan airspace and the withdrawal of several airlines. The airport in Caracas remains operational. Regional leaders are also pushing back. Colombian President Gustavo Petro challenged Washington's authority to impose such bans and issued a severe warning: any attack on Latin America will be perceived as an act of war. Petro invited Trump to visit Colombia personally to witness their own efforts against drug trafficking.
Tensions in the Caribbean continue to escalate with the launch of joint U.S.-Panama military exercises, which, despite official denials, are viewed as pressure directed against Venezuela. The drills, conducted within the framework of Panamax Alpha 2025, are officially declared as operations for the defense of the Panama Canal and the fight against narcotics. Simultaneously, the U.S. has sharply increased its military presence in Puerto Rico, deploying warships near its shores and stepping up air operations, turning the island into a primary outpost for military action.
The goal of this course is to prepare the units in operational and tactical terms, as well as to strengthen interoperability between forces, so that the country possesses greater capabilities in the fight against organized crime and common offenses.
Against the backdrop of this military activity, Donald Trump held a phone conversation with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, discussing trade issues and the fight against organized crime. Topics regarding sanctions and regional security were also touched upon during the conversation, which is significant in the context of the ongoing strikes carried out by the U.S. near the shores of Venezuela. Meanwhile, a call for restraint has come from the Vatican. Pope Leo XIV, the first American-born pope, urged the American administration to refrain from attempts to remove Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by military force.
Regarding Venezuela, together with the local episcopate and the Vatican ambassador, we are seeking ways to calm the situation, primarily for the well-being of the people. Because very often in such situations, it is the people who suffer, not the government.
Washington has adopted a tougher stance, expressing support at the Pentagon level for military strikes carried out within the framework of counter-narcotics efforts, which have already resulted in a large number of casualties. The White House justifies these actions as a fight against narco-terrorists, while international organizations express concern regarding possible human rights violations.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to strike right now, which is the entire point. Right? Deterrence has to matter, not arrest and hand over and then do it again, the rinse and repeat approach of previous administrations. This is meant to get after that approach. And I will just end by saying, as President Trump always has our back, we always have the back of our commanders who are making decisions in difficult situations.
Tensions have also shifted to the airspace, where, despite the U.S. president's threats, Venezuela's main airport continues to operate partially. A number of international airlines have halted flights, in response to which Caracas has canceled their landing permits, rejecting U.S. jurisdiction over its airspace. David Genjoan, ReOpen Media.
And now a quick look at some global states. When it comes to global talent competitiveness, Armenia currently ranks 59th in the world. Among its neighbors, only Georgia sits higher on the list. Experts say Armenia has big ambitions to boost the competitiveness of its workforce, especially in the high-tech sector. However, the main hurdle remains the quality of education, a top priority if the country wants to develop and attract world-class talent. And finally, tonight, big news from the octagon for a fighter who has become synonymous with victory in recent days. Arman Tsarukyan, the #1 contender in the UFC lightweight rankings, has announced a surprise bout right here in Yerevan. On December 13, Tsarukyan will step into the ring for the debut tournament of the Hype Fighting League, a bare-knuckle shutdown. While his opponent remains as a mystery for now, Tsarukyan took social media with a teaser, promising fans that the name, when revealed, will be nothing short of shocking. This much for today. I'm Sona Tumanya. Stay informed with 3 News. Good night.